thank you all for being here today. Each of you has built something that didn't exist before, and whether that's transforming legacy industry or creating new marketplaces or reimagining everyday products through the lens of culture and community. So let's start by getting a little personal and talk about leadership. So leadership skill is not just a skill, but it can be shaped or often shaped by who you are and where you come from. So could you talk a little bit about how your background, your upbringing helped shape your leadership style, and when you noticed it in a moment where if there was a moment where you sort of specifically noticed that your background helped shape that? So can we start with Sandro, please?
Yeah, sure. And first off, thank you so much for having me. Thanks to the Asia Society for having all of us on the panel today. I think the main thing that I would say for myself is I'm a big learner by doer and a big leader by doer. I have a hard time leading a team or kind of giving direction without having done it myself. And so and I don't know how much of that is my upbringing, as an Asian, my parents, or just generally how I process the world. But in many ways, when I started the company, I had honestly no idea what the beverage industry was. I came in very much as a consumer. What I like to tell folks is that I am basically the same weight that I was when I was 12 years old. So I love to eat everything. And so, coming in with that level of, I guess, curiosity and trying to bridge the gap between, hey, I'm walking in a grocery store aisle. The difference between me walking down the aisle as a shopper and then actually getting a product on the shelf, the commercialization of that, as a former engineer, like that kind of real world challenge just kind of fascinated me. And then, I'm sure we can go into more of origin story about why I started Sanzo, but I think that kind of inherent, I guess, a curiosity, maybe that's what ultimately guides how I build and how I try to lead my teams, is kind of being ever curious about the world, how we operate, especially in an industry that is quite archaic, and where we are the challenger brand. We kind of by definition have to be innovative in how we think about our go-to-market, how we think about our execution, our marketing, et cetera. And so, that's kind of my approach.
Thank you. And can we move to David, please?
Sure. I guess when I think about my arc to getting started and getting here, I don't know if there's a kind of key moment that I could point to and say, oh, this is what shaped me as a leader. But I think I had this a very important, I think, first job when I was in college. I had gotten an opportunity to work for this software development company. And I wasn't an engineer. I went to film school. So I wound up not even taking any math classes in college. So I was completely not the typical Asian sort of engineer. But this was a software development company, and there was a job posting for a office manager. And I remember going in thinking, like, I'm completely not qualified for this job. I kind of know a little bit of something about computers. I kind of got the gist that the job was probably more about, like, changing the water from the water cooler and, like, getting rid of the paper jams from the copy machine and things like that. And I sat there, waiting for the interview, and then, the office manager came in, asked me a couple of questions, and I got the job. And I was like, oh, that's so weird. I'm not sure why they would give it to me. And I remember one of the founders of the business came in, took one look at me, and she goes, oh, of course. I know why you're hired. And I was like, what do you mean? And actually, I take that back. This is, as I was leaving the job, this is a year later, she was like, I'll tell you why you were hired. And I was like, why? She was like, well, our manager at the time had a thing for Asians. But she also had a thing for blondes. And so what I didn't explain was, like, I had blonde hair down to my shoulders. So she goes, as soon as I saw a blonde Asian walk in, I knew you had the job. Now, I think the reason why I think this was kind of important to me was because I was underqualified for the job, but it was more about the experience working for these two women who had this philosophy about supporting their staff in a way. It kind of reminded me a little bit of what James was talking about in the prior session, but it gave me the understanding of what trying to get the potential out of people really is about. Because I can tell you, at this job, my job was to actually format floppies. And I know a lot of you guys have no idea what I'm talking about. But back in the day, when there was not, when you had to actually use these little plastic disks to code, all the engineers would be doing their database coding, and I had to slide in the floppy, type C:, format A:, in return, and then the thing would go bzz, 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 and spit the disk out, and then I'd hand it to the engineers, and that was my job for like hours and hours and hours. And the entire company ran off of the C drive of this one computer that was on the office manager's desk, like the accounting system, the invoices, everything. And like an idiot, I popped the disk in, and I was like, wait, is it C:, format A:, or is it A:, format C? I inverted it. And all of a sudden, the little green light's flickering, the disk isn't buzzing as it should, and I'm just watching the screen go zzzz. I formatted the hard drive of the computer, of the entire company. And I remember walking into the founder's, I was like, oh my God, I just did something really dumb. And she was like, what? And I said, I erased the drive. And she looked at me, and you can see she was just kind of exasperated, and she turned around, and she pulled this box off her shelf, and it was like, Norton unerase. And she goes like, job security, go rebuild the disk. And so back then, when it's like a TMI, but when you actually deleted something, it's like it deletes the header. So the actual data is still on the drive. So I had to go back and rebuild the header for all 10,000 files or whatever. It took me weeks to actually piece it back together again. And so I got that done, and they gave me a fresh new box of floppies, started it, and I did it again. But this time, I was fast enough to unplug the machine, so it didn't actually do it. And I tell you this story because I can guarantee you, at the age of 20, I think 19 or 20, if you were to look at everyone in this room and take a picture of yourself at the age of 19 or 20 and compare it to me at the age of 19 and 20, I'm easily the least qualified person to run a public company for 20 years and to build a business as I did. And it taught me that it doesn't matter if the person doesn't have the experience, doesn't have the knowledge, has blonde hair and is Asian, given the right circumstances, given the right guidance, and given the right sort of mentorship, I used to say, anybody could be the CEO. And the potential for people is truly limitless. And I think that's really informed how I managed and grew the business over my career.
That's such a great story. All right, hard to follow, but please, Betty.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. That's a really hard story to follow. And I'd like to see a photo of you with the blonde hair. So when you ask that question, I think the first thing that I think of is I'm the daughter of Chinese immigrants. And so, which I'm sure, some of you here have that shared experience as well. And my parents came here to build a better life for myself and my sister. But I always felt as an immigrant that I was always a little bit on the outside and trying to figure out, how to belong. And figuring out my place in this world. And so I grew very comfortable in a way with discomfort. And, I even remember when I graduated, or when I was going into college, like a good, like a, typical tiger parent. My parents wanted me to be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, something that my dad always said, if you have a license, you'll always have a job. And so I severely disappointed him by being an English major and wanting to be a journalist. Ultimately, it didn't turn out too bad. The time that my dad realized that maybe it wasn't such a terrible choice was when he saw my name and as a byline in the Wall Street Journal. And Asian parents, when they see a brand name, they're like, oh, okay, now I get it. Now, okay, maybe this is something here. But this discomfort, I think, is something that has kind of helped me move from career to career. So journalist, and then entrepreneur, and then being in the C-suite, because it was uncomfortable, really uncomfortable each time. And I'm sure many of you have heard, that term imposter syndrome. And I don't think it's just something that's specific to women, or minorities. I think everybody feels imposter syndrome, and they feel that when they get into a place where they don't quite feel like they know what they need to know, and they don't feel like they quite belong. And because I grew up feeling a little bit of this anyway, it didn't take a huge leap for me to say, you know what, I'm going to try. I'm going to try to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to try, when I sold my company, I'm going to, try this new role at the NYSC, and it's going to be really uncomfortable. I'm going to make a lot of mistakes, and I'm going to look foolish at some times, and I'll say the wrong thing, and all of those, went through my mind. But I felt that I could get through that hurdle. And I think just the last thing I would say about that would be that one way I have gotten through the imposter syndrome, well, it's actually a couple of things, but one is to just remain very open, extremely open to feedback, and in that, Sandro, you're saying about curiosity, having that curiosity, but also I think what's also has helped me a lot, and that I've only learned really through these last few years, is having presence, like being not having presence, like having some sort of stature. What I mean by that is being in the present moment, being here and now, and really engaged and really listening to what is happening now. I think that has helped me through those moments.
That's incredible. So I feel that imposter syndrome all day long, all the time. So do you feel that also as an Asian
100%,
man?
all the time.
How do you get over that? Just to come off of script a little bit.
I don't think you do. I don't trust someone that doesn't feel imposter syndrome, because life is constantly full of challenges, and we're learning as we go along. And I feel like if you don't have imposter syndrome, then you're just like a real arrogant prick.
Or you're not growing.
Yeah. I mean, I'll co-sign that in a certain way. And I think that maybe the one thing I would just personally add is that it actually very well dovetails off of David's point. And I'll say it's maybe one of my initial mantras to getting into entrepreneurship, and I'm going to butcher the exact quote, but the idea came from Steve Jobs, and it was essentially that, if we look around this room, everything from the chair we're sitting in to the microphones to your seats, everything was created and designed by a human at the time in which they did it, with the technology and the tools that they had at that exact time. And so I think for me, fortunately, I guess through enough experience, and maybe I don't almost say just, willingness to step into rooms where I'm uncomfortable, to deal and confront with the imposter syndrome. You meet other people in the room who also, frankly, don't know what they're doing, or they're also learning it as they go along as well. And so, I think I'm with David in that I'll co-sign. Yeah, you never get over it. At the macro, in the micro, the things that spur me to take action is frankly just kind of being in the room and appreciating that we're all kind of building in real time.
Thank you. I'm going to try that. I mean, I feel this every day anyway, so I'll try it tomorrow when I'm back in the office.
One thing I might add, depending on the organizations that people come from, whether you're in a startup or you're in a Fortune 500, and I know it's a little bit different at certain conglomerates that have really been built up over decades and have a lot of technical debt, but those are still systems that were built by people. And now, again, like whether, especially at large conglomerates, the product of M&A, it's actually the tech systems are ultimately just kind of all jumbled together. Like to me, ultimately, I'm still fascinated by the world as it is, whether it's a physical product or whatever, a large bank. That piece of that code base, at least for now, and again with AI, this will obviously change, but like everything was still built by a human. And so I'm like, everyone in this room really has the ability to affect change.
Yeah, and to think that people as successful as you guys are feeling the imposter syndrome all the time makes me feel okay to feel that as well, right? Okay, so let's talk about the next topic, which was like risk-taking. So most of us grew up in Asian culture. A lot of those cultures don't necessarily encourage risk-taking. And if anything, like Betty said, the parents prefer their kids to become lawyers or doctors or, accountants, where you have a license. So hence, I am a lawyer. And yet, you leaders have taken big, bold bets. So how did you come over or overcome this propensity to avoid risk? And how did you change your mindset so that you can take all these big risks in order to succeed in your businesses? Should we start from the other end then, Betty?
Yeah, sure. It's really, for me, it's very, very simple. And it actually came out of a moment that I had when I was at Bloomberg. And when I was at Bloomberg, I was interviewing a lot of the big names, obviously, that we read about: Warren Buffett and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. And I part of my job was to interview them, about the news of the day. But I would also, at the end of these interviews and when the cameras turned off, I thought to myself, how often does anybody get a chance to sit in front of these great minds and ask them, any number of questions that you want? They're there, they're a captive audience. And there was one time I visited Elon Musk at the SpaceX headquarters, and I was asking him a little bit, and this conversation was actually about his career, so it was very on topic. And we were talking about his early days at Tesla and other things in the evolution of his career. And I asked him a question. I said, you're running SpaceX, you're running Tesla, you're building this and that, and you just seem like somebody who has absolutely no fear. And he just looked at me like I was crazy and was like, "Are you serious? I have a ton of fear." He's like, "I'm afraid every single day." But he said, "My biggest fear is the fear of regret. So I don't want to look in the mirror one day and not have done all the things that I wanted to do." And that's what drives his, at that time he was saying, the way I am. And I took away from that moment, it just hit me. It just landed at the right moment for me. This fear of regret. Oftentimes you don't want to have, fear is not a good thing. So if there's one good fear to have, I would say fear of regret. And that propelled me to action. So shortly after that interview, that was sort of the final straw that made me, where I decided that I was going to go for it and start my company, because I didn't want to have that fear of regret.
David?
I think we each take different paths, right? And I think the courage that, Betty, you exhibited to take that leap is incredible. I feel like there is oftentimes this mystique about entrepreneurs and startups and being so risk tolerant, and I think it's actually the exact opposite. I think entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs because they have inside information. that they actually see that there's much less risk than the rest of the world sees. And that's why they pursue what they pursue. Or you're just in a situation, and I think for me, you know, I went to film school in 1983, you know, unless you're Ang Lee, you're not making any movies as an Asian person. And it was clear that was not going to be my career path. So you go through 4 years, get a BFA, and now what? And so to me, it was starting a business was because I was not employable, as my other boss discovered. But so it's like, you know, people go, oh my God, the risk you took. I was like, there was no risk. It was like, this was my only path. That's the only thing I could do. And so, you know, I feel like there's a naivete that one has to have to be successful as an entrepreneur. Because I think you talk to someone who has built something or survived a number of years, and you'll hear one common refrain. If I knew back then what I knew now, I would never have done this. Like you'll hear that over and over again. So you have to almost be able to suspend your disbelief, to willingly enter very uncharted waters, and just know you'll work like hell to survive. But at the end of the day, it's not really about taking risks. It's about survival.
And having some sort of inside information or something that you know that others you think don't know, right? So Sandro, you were an investment banker before. So do you agree? Is that how you decided to start your company also?
Yeah, I mean, I could just co-sign everything that both Betty and David said. I mean, especially the regret minimization framework. As I like, you know, that funny. You got it from Elon. I heard that from Jeff Bezos. It was very much a similar idea before he started Amazon. And what I will say for myself is that, particularly when I was in investment banking and evaluating this, I will also co-sign what David said about re-underwriting risk. So at the time, you know, had a 4-year degree, had an engineering major, worked at one of the big banks. And I started actually sitting there and saying, what actually is the risk here? If this doesn't work out, this will effectively be, the equivalent of having, I don't know, dropped $200,000-$300,000 on business school, except I will have actually done something. Sorry to all the B school grads. And I think, so, and then at the end of the day, I will have actually done something or at least learned a lot that would propel me for the next step in the journey. And so when I kind of started looking at it from that perspective, it became a bit obvious to me that actually it would be a bit riskier to not do something because, I would have that kind of inherent regret. And then, as to the inside information, this skips ahead a couple of years in one startup in the middle. But when I was ideating on the idea for Sanzo, like I guess for me, one of my insights was, hey, it was the year 2018. Crazy Rich Asians was the #1 film at the box office. BTS had done their first nationwide tour in the United States, and they were literally selling out football stadiums. And, these were in Vegas, Southern California, and different parts of the country. And I was like, okay, definitely, yes, there is a certain critical mass of Asian Americans that can fill up a football stadium. But really it had to be the case. It was more likely the case that actually Asian culture, I guess in K-pop's world, Korean culture in particular, was really having this massive crossover, mainstream impact, and especially with Crazy Rich Asians and other things that were just happening in different parts of pop culture. And so I guess for me, it was like almost obvious that if you kind of study culture, it starts in the world of media and entertainment, and then trickles down into things like consumer brands. And then to me, I would say like the last step on this is political engagement, where you are hopefully starting to see, especially, Mayor Wu in Boston. There's a whole world of, Asian Americans now getting more heavily involved in politics, but you kind of see this curve of how culture permeates. And for me, it was kind of, there was a high, I guess at that point, it's almost like my risk was not as much there because I just had such high conviction that this was just going to be a thing. And whether it was me or somebody else, someone was going to figure it out. And then maybe, I guess, having a little bit of the cockiness to say, well, then it should be me.
And this is just on the tangent, off the tangent, but we did talk about before we were preparing for the panel that you are now starting to see, not just on the East Coast and West Coast, demands for Asian goods, but in the Midwest.
Yeah, I mean, we've had the opportunity to kind of have conversations with buyers across the country. So I actually spent a lot of my time in the Midwest, in Texas, in particular, and you're actually seeing the highest growth rate of Asian flavors, specifically in that area of the country. And it's just like, if you kind of look at demographic trends, migration trends, especially post-pandemic, yeah, it's almost like at some point you kind of look up and you're like, well, okay, the coasts, then you have the middle of the country, and you're like, wow, we're actually running out of areas of the country where people don't want rooms that look more like this, and policy outside of these four walls be damned. Like Americans, people, consumers are voting with their dollars, voting with their wallets that they want to see more of our representation across all aspects of their life.
Betty, did you want to say something?
Yeah, well, there was something when Sandro was talking, like it just made me, it brought home, or this thought came to my mind where I think, and I don't think it's just entrepreneurs, but maybe entrepreneurs are a good example of this, but what entrepreneurs see as risk is really like life purpose, is really their mission, their what aligns with their, who they are and what they want to impact in this world. So, so for Sandro, I mean, I'm curious, but, I think you're spreading great drinks, but really joy and a moment of pleasure. And
Thank you.
You know what the mission is.
And I would say the same for David.
Yeah.
I do think it's mission-based, right? Because, again, to debunk the mythology of entrepreneurs and startups, it's like, who in the right mind would want to start something that feels impossible, that has not existed before, that you're underfinanced, you're understaffed, you're overworked? It's a horrible, horrible condition to be operating under. It's like it has to be something else that's driving you to do something like that, because it's like
masochism.
No, exactly. It's so not sexy. It's really just not a good life, and so few actually are successful. Like we get to sit here and be like, oh my God, we had this amazing career, but like what is it? Only 3 out of 10 companies make it past their 4th year. It's the success rate is so low. So it's like, from the looks of it, it's like, I've been in conferences where there are a lot of people like, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur, because they read about like how cool it is, or the raising money, or like whatever Bitcoin nonsense. But it's like the actual real life, day-to-day operating as a startup and entrepreneur is really hard. And you have to be driven by something else to actually power you through.
This is a great segue, though. The title of our panel is Lessons from You Guys in terms of how to lead through uncertainty, right? So then how did you must have had ups and downs. We go through economic busts and booms and everything in between. You've listed your company, but then you had to delist it. And then you relist it again, which is like a survival mentality. But how did you go through? It's not, everything is not going to be glorious and amazing, right? There are messy times. So each of you, it would be great if you could share the stories of like how you got through yourself, got out of bed every day, push yourselves, push your teams through those uncertain times or not so great times. Should we start with you, Sandro?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, for anyone who's aspiring to be an entrepreneur, who actually, after this talk, actually still wants to maybe do it, one of the, I think, if I go back to my earliest days, one of the things I had to really internalize was this idea that if you were being told no 19 out of 20 times or 95 out of 100 times, you are actually having outstanding success. Whether that's in raising capital, whether that's in getting a buyer to put your product on the shelf, there really is this very low success rate. But if you can start turning a couple yeses, then there's some momentum that can really build on itself. And so, I think to Betty's point, I appreciate the kind words there. I think for me, yeah, if I'm really like honing in on what got me through, it really was this belief, and I really use the word conviction. I almost don't want to use the word passion because it almost evokes like a certain level of emotion that I almost felt like for myself was out of the equation. It was actually, to me, beyond that, almost just so obvious that something like this had to exist. Now, again, I could be or was probably living in a state of delusion, but it really was that conviction around what we were building that got me through and got me comfortable with saying, "Hey, okay, I actually know that along the journey to success are going to be these mini failures." I think we have this idea, this preconceived notion in society that here is you in the middle, and then on one side is failure, and on the other side of you is success. And I actually think reframing that to actually being more of like, actually, here's you, here's success. On the way there, there's going to be failures, learnings, lessons along the way, and just kind of, embracing that that's actually part of the journey. Those are probably the biggest things that I can kind of sit here and say. It was just like, being in it, like the mini games, the mental games you play with yourself, it just kind of, recognizing that. I mean, and for anyone here who's a big, I'll say my last thing here will be that, for anyone here who's into sports, I'm a big basketball guy, big baseball fan, and, there's so many adages around how, like, if you have a batting average, if you get a hit 3 out of every 10 times in baseball, they put you in the Hall of Fame. In basketball, like, no one shoots 100%. Michael Jordan missed the most amount of potentially game-winning shots, but he was still the greatest of all time. And so just kind of internalizing really that is part of the journey. Again, it's not an easy path, but it's one that I think if you have enough conviction in what you're doing, it's what puts you over the top.
David?
I think for us, it really boiled down to a level of stamina and a refusal to kind of fail. It sounds very flippant, but and I know a lot of businesses that started around the time we did in 95, 96 failed, and there was just no way to will yourself out of that. But if I think back on some of the darkest moments, we got our seed financing in 96. We were public by 99. That was an insane time, that first internet bubble. Within 7 months, the stock had started to slowly deflate, and then within a year, we were delisted. If you trade below $1 for 90 days, you're delisted. And I remember, having emergency board meetings every Monday night. We lived in this little studio apartment. We just had our daughter. So I had to sit in the bathroom having these calls with the board. And there was just all this hand wringing and worry and like, okay, what do we do? Like, maybe we should sell the company. We have this offer to buy the company for $1 a share. 12 months ago, we had gone public at $10 a share. And you're suddenly faced with these sort of like moments of like, okay, do you just throw in the towel? Is this like cutting your losses? Like, and I remember there was this one conversation where this one board member was adamant that we sell the company at $1. And at one point I just said to him, I was like, I don't know if that's what we're here for. Like, the business, I can see a path out of this. I can see, it's the stock price is not a reflection of the company, and the company was actually progressing, and we're still losing money, but we're losing less and less money every month. And the guy shouted at me, and he was like, "If we don't sell now, we'll be trading below 50 cents within 6 months." And I remember saying, like, the difference between 50 cents and $1 to me right now is nothing. I'd rather, I'll roll the dice. He was right. Within 6 months, the stock hit a low of 26 cents. And we were valued at about as much, in fact, we had about $5 million in the bank, and our market cap was about $5 million. So basically, the shareholders were basically saying the company's not worth a thing. You're only worth what's in your bank account. And I remember thinking that, I didn't sign up for this. Like, I now need to figure out how to motivate, a few hundred people to keep working really hard, to keep, their eye on the prize, that there's still something there. And when you've had this incredible sort of elation of like, oh my God, you're public, and you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars, to now you're worth $5, and everyone's options are underwater, you really understand like the depths of like darkness in terms of running a business. And I think the thing that became like our sort of saving grace on this was that the idea of innovating and the idea of creating things for the consumer in a way that would delight and engage them, we were still getting that feedback every day from our site and from our interactions. So that was our true north, right? Like, we weren't managing for the stock price. And that's one of the things that you see like American business colliding with, because it's like, if all you're doing is managing for the stock price, I would have sold the company for $1. But we were servicing a different constituent, and it wasn't our shareholder. It was our audience, it was our customer, it was the industry. And I think as a CEO or someone who's running a business, it's really, really important to understand that you have more stakeholders to what you do than just the shareholders. And I think that's kind of what allowed us to navigate through those times.
Great story.
Yeah, great story. I think, I know Scott Galloway has this phrase that he often says, which is, it's not ever as good as it seems, it's never as bad as it seems. I don't think he's the originator of that, but he speaks about that a lot, and it resonates for me because I've always felt that, everything, when something really great is happening to you, it's almost guaranteed that something bad will happen eventually, that, we're always kind of oscillating between the two. So it's never as great as you think, and it's never as bad as you think. And that often brings me comfort, particularly during the bad times. Because I remember one time, one of my advisors, when I was building Radiate, I would have like really like big swings in how I felt. I'd get a yes from an investor, super high. But then, a no from a customer, boom, down into the ditch. And I remember this advisor said to me, Betty, and this was particularly like bad moment. He was like, put an X on the calendar. We're both old school, so we had paper calendars, but I put an X, and he's like, trust me, 6 weeks later, look back on that date and tell me now how you feel. And so I tried it, and he was right. 6 weeks later, I looked back, and so many things changed that day wasn't nearly as bad as I'd felt at that moment. So I think having that in mind is always very helpful, particularly, when nobody needs help when great things are happening, right? But particularly it's in the bad moments when you need that reminder. But the second thing that has given me a realization of is how to separate your emotions out of what is happening to you in the moment. And it's very difficult to do, but the more you remind yourself and are self-aware, you're able to withstand, those highs and lows, because you've taken as much emotion as you can out of it. It helps you make better decisions. It helps you, see more clearly. It takes a lot of self-awareness to do that. But when you're able to, to kind of think clearly without having so much heavy emotion, that I think is very helpful for managing those highs and lows.
Thank you. That's a little similar to what you just said, right? Because you said conviction and not passion, because you don't want to put the emotion into the equation. So yeah, I'm going to have to remember that, because even in the corporate world, we always have bad days. And on those bad days, I'm just going to put that X in the digital calendar that I have and see if I could go back and see. Thank you. So, Sandro, you talked a little bit about roadblocks and the no's versus the yays. Your business is trying to get the shelf space in these places so that people will immediately grab that and go to the register. And yet you had many no's, many rejections. How did you turn them into yays, or how did you continue to go on?
Yeah, sure. So, kind of have I don't know, someone early on in my journey gave me this tidbit. I'm sure if anyone here works in sales, you probably get it, but I don't know. It resonated well with me that, for the most part, a no is really just a not yet. And, right, like, I think that was one of the things that got me, again, if you can tell, I can speak with, I'm a little passionate. Like, I actually look for ways to check against my own emotions. It's like, I need these kinds of, I don't know, mnemonics or just like things that help check me. And so it would, that idea would very much help cushion the blow, was this idea that, like, no is really just not yet. And so, I think especially in an industry like ours, it tends to be really capital intensive. I mean, just to paint like a small picture for people. When you go to a grocery store, I'm assuming, I'm assuming most people here actually still do their grocery shopping, and you were to go in at, let's say 8 o'clock in the morning, right when the store opens up. When you walk in, you'll mostly see, the apples nicely stacked into the pyramid. You'll walk down the aisles and all the product is, neatly merchandised. But if you were to walk in 12 hours before that at 8 p.m., the night before, you would not see that. You would see, the pyramid of apples, way down. You would see the shelves relatively empty. And so, I think one of the biggest appreciations that I got in this business is that so much of the work actually happens after hours. It happens during the time when, no one's really awake. It happens on overnight shift when people are, restocking the shelves, delivery trucks are coming in with product and, delivering that off. And so, it kind of goes back to the original point that I brought up about how I really wanted to develop, I guess like maniacally an understanding from soup to nuts about how things got from, I'll just say, raw materials to all the way like on the shelf with, you hopefully buying it. And so the biggest one of the biggest things that I learned there was just like so much, especially in the earliest days, and in many ways in our industry, still is the case on a daily basis. So much of our business is showing up. We're not in a rocket science type of business. We're not developing necessarily new technology. And so much of our business is really how we show up for our retail customers, how we show up for how we show up for the end customer. And so, I know the original question was something around like how we build during the no's, how we build through the adversity. A lot of it for me was just, hey, how can I create momentum? And if I'm going to get told no here, and again, I kind of use this continued idea of like, if you're getting, especially in entrepreneurship, if you're getting a 95% rejection rate, you're doing a great job. It's getting through all of that, understanding like we're just going to get told no a lot. So cool, let's fast forward through all the no's, get to the no's as quickly as possible so we can start getting to the yeses and manufacturing the yeses and create the momentum to build up from there. I think for me, it's just this idea of like, again, like the different games we play, either for myself as an entrepreneur, I very much try to instill this in my team as well too, to help get the blockers out, because no one wants to get told no, right? Like no one wants to run into a roadblock. But if we can all kind of internalize that, hey, the no's are parts of how we get to the eventual yeses. I think that especially for a startup is kind of, it's kind of the only way in which we win is by creating that velocity.
That's tenacity. And so, Betty, you've talked a little bit when we were preparing for the panel about a moment when you were so close to giving up. So could you share with the audience that moment and how then you didn't give up and continued on?
Yeah, it's sort of a similar story although to a smaller scale, to what David was talking about, where we were in the midst of building Radiate, which was the education technology company that we were building. And, we felt that we really were building a great product, that we were getting good feedback from early customers that, that they really appreciated the leadership lessons that they were watching. It was, I'm not going to go into detail on what the whole company was doing, but basically we were creating videos that were dispensing leadership advice, and a lot of companies really were starting to adapt this for their younger employees. But it came at a time where, we were still testing things out, and the growth wasn't as fast as some of our investors would have liked. And so and I was in the middle of our second capital raise, and some of the investors pulled out because they felt it wasn't quick, we weren't developing quick enough. Thankful for those who stayed. But then at the same time, a leader in our firm went and got another job because he felt he saw the writing on the wall, which was that this company was not going to last much longer. And I could at that time also see with my team, very young team, a little bit of panic in their eyes that, oh my gosh, maybe we're not going to be around for the next, in the next month or the next, 3 months. But I just knew. So that was the moment when, me as the founder and the CEO, I had to be the, the foundation for everybody. But I also really genuinely believed we were building a good thing. And I had to kind of go back to what Sandro was saying, like my conviction. My conviction was even if this goes down, I know that I am building, something good, and I'm going to see it to the end. And it actually even makes me a little emotional thinking about it. And I just, I said, at the time I'd read this book, The Hard Thing About the Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. And there was a part in the book that really stuck out to me where he said, as an entrepreneur, you don't need 500 things to happen. You just need one thing. That's just all you need. And so I just said, I'm just going to keep moving ahead. I don't care that everybody thinks we're going down. I'm just going to move ahead and keep putting one foot in front of the other. And I just need one thing. That's it. And it was. A lot of people also didn't know, but at the time I had a full-time job at Bloomberg, so I was doing Bloomberg and my company. And I remember I was finishing up anchoring the evening program at Bloomberg, and an email popped up from Jeff Sprecher, who is still the chairman and CEO of Intercontinental Exchange. They own many exchanges, including the New York Stock Exchange. And this email popped up, and it just said something very simple like, he's a CEO, right? He has no time more than just a sentence or two. And it was like, hey, can we chat? And I thought it was about Bloomberg. So, I thought it might have been something he watched or whatever. And I almost wasn't going to reply until the next morning. I was like, whatever. But again, getting back to this, staying open. I just need one thing. Who knows? I just said, okay, so something in me felt like I need to respond right away. So I did. And we set up a call the next morning, really quick set up. And I remember this very specifically. I'm sitting there in the Secaucus Junction, New Jersey Transit train station, sort of juggling a few things. And he just starts talking, and he talks about how much he likes what we're building. And then literally about 20 minutes into the conversation, he says, and we'd like to buy your company and make you executive vice chair of the New York Stock Exchange. And I just remember, I was like, is there a camera around here? Is this for real? And it was very much for real. And it was that one thing. And shortly after that, it was probably 6 weeks later that we were signing the agreement to be acquired. So I still think to this day, what are the lessons I learned from that? I think it answer your emails. That's number one. Make sure you do that. And number two, face the moment, right? That's why it's so important, again, going to Sandro's point about having that conviction, because that's what will drive you in those hardest moments. And it's very similar to what David was saying, which is, everyone else will tell you what to do, or will abandon ship or whatever it might be. But if you're the CEO, and it's almost like your duty, you know what you need to do, and it's really to the very heart of who you are.
Just jump in real quick, because you encapsulate something that we always try to identify and hire for. And one of the questions we would ask people would be when they were interviewing was like, do you consider yourself a lucky person? It's like a self-assessment. And, it's like being Asians, we all understand the value of luck and how important it is. But you have to be honest with yourself. Like, if you think about it, like, do you think of yourself as a lucky person? Because the person who says they do, what usually comes along behind that is a whole different kind of attitude. And I would say that's encapsulated in Betty. Like, to be lucky, you have to create your own luck, right? And to do that, you have to be open. You have to be open to the possibilities. You have to be willing to experiment, to be curious. You're by nature facing forward and leaning in. People, and I'm sure you all have come across people at work or people who are just like, oh my God, that person's like snake bit. Like, they're the most unlucky person. And I bet you they're also the darkest, the grumpiest, the oh my God, it's gonna rain. Oh my God, it's like, we call them negative Nancys at a meeting. Like, it's like, yeah. And it's a real qualitative difference. And I would say, all the different things that I would say was contributed to the success of our business, luck had an enormous impact on it. And it was because I think we nurtured a collective corporate culture and attitude towards being open and to being, creators of our own luck.
Great, and hard work, right? And there were
always
times,
hard work. That's the baseline.
And there were times you made difficult decisions as a leader. And so when you make difficult decisions, and we were talking about this, David, you had the most interesting story about a time when you made a difficult decision, even though it may not have been the popular one among your team members, but it was something that you felt personal and important. So could we share that?
Sure. So the year's 1999. It's the millennium. It's coming to an end. And we were really good at spinning up PR opportunities for the company. And so we decided to have this big year-long contest. Every month we would feature a couple, a story about a couple, because we're all about weddings. And we just wanted to highlight, examples of what would be a millennial couple. And it would culminate in this big contest at the end of the year where everyone would vote, our audience would come in and vote and say, this is the couple of the millennium. And I think we had like Capital One give us 1 million points, and we had all sorts of prizes. It was going to be a huge opportunity. And as every month unrolled, we featured a Southern couple, featured African American couple, Asian couples. Like, we really tried to cover like all demographic groups. And I think it was May or June was a lesbian couple, 2 Kimmys. I still remember. And gay marriage was not legal at the time, but civil ceremonies were happening in certain places. And that was the year we were going public. And we were scheduled to go public in December, towards the end of the year. And for most of you probably realize, like, going public is like the single largest marketing moment a young company has. Like, you are on the Wall Street Journal, you're on CNBC. It's like you've arrived. You've kind of graduated into this whole echelon. And I still remember, like, we were preparing for the pricing, and the bankers are getting all excited, and you're just like constantly like dealing with press. And my PR manager comes into my office, and she's like white as a sheet. And I was like, what's going on? What's the matter? And she's like, we have a situation. And it's like, well, what? She was like, it's with the Millennial Couple Contest. I was like, how could that be a situation? It's going to be amazing. We're going public. We're going to announce the couple. She was like, no. The two Kimmies went online and got the entire gay community come to our site. And they voted them. It's a landslide. And she showed me the charts. It was like every couple was like here, and the Kimmies were like there. and she was like, what do we do? I was like, what do you mean, what do we do? She was like, well, no one knows. Like, we didn't have a live chart. We could just say, like, the Southern couple won or whatever. Like, I don't know if we can have the Kimmies win this contest. And, we actually sat there and we were just like, well, we kind of have to. Not only because they won legitimately, but also, when you're running a wedding media company, you don't think of yourself as actually having real social impact. But here was a moment that we could actually kind of draw a line in the sand, and we can say something that we collectively as an organization stands for. And, not to make it bigger than it was, but I have to remind everybody, like, I was born in 1965, so I'm going to turn 60 this year. It wasn't until 1967, the Supreme Court case, Lovers versus Virginia, that it was legal for an Asian to marry a white person in America. Let that sit in for a second. 2 years after I was born, would my marriage be legal that I have today? And so for us, it became a social mission. We announced the two Kimmies, and there were a number of people who were thrilled. The gay community was super excited. We got so much hate mail. We had advertisers cancel their contracts. We had people say, how dare you, be the voice of the devil? I mean, it was like horrific. We saw a side of this country that honestly, having grown up in New York, I didn't realize was there. We're certainly seeing a lot of it these days. And we tried to spin it. Like I remember saying to people who managed to get me on the phone, and I would tell these, I specifically remember talking to this jeweler. I was like, you have an opportunity to sell 2 diamond engagement rings with one couple. This is good for business. The wedding industry had been flat. 10% of the population is gay. This is an opportunity for the entire industry to grow. Are you guys kidding me? You should be advocating for this. At the end of the day, I think my staff, our audience, became even more proud and felt even greater loyalty to the brand because we stood up for something. We stood down a lot of hate. We lost business for sure. But the principle mattered more. And, I'd like to say that was a hard decision, but it wasn't.
So on that positive note, can we each give the audience one piece of advice as we're all going through a great deal of uncertainty, as you sort of alluded to just now, but as we go through a great deal of uncertainty, but also in the office, right? As we're working, we go through challenges. So what are the piece of advice that you could give that they could take away today?
I think for me, it's reflecting on this since we did our, pre-call, and just kind of reflecting on the world as it is. And, I have a number of friends going through, career changes. They're evaluating what they want to do. My wife's kind of going through a similar thing right now as well. And I honestly think it's almost, I apologize if this is a little cliche or a little too hand-wavy, but I guess just maintaining a level of flexibility around around your career path and what you want to do. And it depends. Yeah, and obviously, I think I say this as someone who, not everyone in this room is necessarily aspiring to, live the masochistic life of founders and entrepreneurs here, but just kind of how you can take some of this and go on into your daily life. And it's just maintaining a level of flexibility, openness around opportunities. I mean, the big elephant in the room, depending on your business, is probably what's happening in the world of AI. But there are other just general business macro changes that are going on. And so I think for my colleagues and friends who have had the most struggles, it's because they've probably held on to the past a little too long. And in many ways, if I were to kind of diagnose, if I'm trying to play therapist here, it's that they have rooted their personal self-worth in what they had previously built or done. And they were kind of keeping that, I'd almost say, a little too sacred. And it's almost just kind of like, well, hey, just kind of embracing kind of what's going on. And I think once you do that, you can kind of maintain a little bit more of an openness, maybe more of like a wealth mentality versus a scarcity mindset around what opportunities are out there for you now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So I think that's probably like my biggest thing, especially in an environment where everything seems to be changing every day, is just to Betty's original point, just remaining open.
David?
Okay, I'm going to get canceled for this. But,
Yes.
I have this deep sense of ambivalence. The morning sessions were really powerful, and a lot of the messages that were being expressed, I think, are really, really important. But I can't help but feel that collectively, as Asians, we struggle with our own identity, and we struggle with what it means to embrace that. And you heard the word authenticity, you heard the words. There were a lot of apologies for the people in the room, like because they're kind of positioning us in a stereotypical way, and we're in this like totally fucked up post-DEI kind of world where we don't even know what we should be saying or what we can't be saying and stuff like that. And I have to say that like as much as we don't want to embody the stereotypes, because stereotypes are constricting, whatever, my advice is, lean into the things that give you strength. So, like, I feel like I'm alive today because of Bruce Lee. I grew up in a really, really rough neighborhood. And when Enter the Dragon hit the theaters, every kid in that middle school was afraid of me. And I was like, and literally, I was like this scrawny, skinny kid, but if I made like a sound of a cat, like, meow, and like they would be terrified. When we were launching our business, like, I went to film school, I didn't take a math class, I'm not an engineer, but we would sit there and, we were proposing doing something kind of crazy, publishing a huge volumes amounts of information through the technology with a content management system that we had to build. And I remember sitting, like, going up and down Sand Hill Road, meeting with all the VCs, and these guys would be like, wait, can you really build this? And I would take a very serious look, and I go, yeah. They're like, the Chinese guy said, yeah. So, like, you understand why I have imposter syndrome, but I totally hear, I believe in the fake it till you make it, like, mode. And you know what? There's some stereotypes that we Asians have that give us some superpowers. Lean into them, use them. Don't be afraid of them. That's my advice.
Great. And Betty, you have the last word.
It's always hard to follow David. Very, very hard. I think, so sort of similar to kind of what is like what was evoked in David's story about the two Kimmies, is this sense that the external world will impose things on you and will tell you what is right or wrong. And you in your jobs may be told those things, and if you don't follow those things, you may not have a job. And those are things that you may not agree with, and we are in this age, as David just mentioned, where we don't know what side of DEI now is, X company at, or what, and we don't know where it's going to be in 2 or 3 years or beyond. And there's just so many different things that we're being told are right or wrong. So I think that means that it's extra critical for each and every one of you to really understand at the core what your values are. Like, what do you believe in? Who are you? Like, what are your values? Because from there, you can make decisions about your future, about your job, about your, about anything in your life. But you make those decisions from your core values and not from what other people are saying is right or wrong or should be done or should not be done. And I think that that's going to be ever more important because this world is definitely changing at a faster and faster pace.
Thank you so much. Please give a round of applause for our panelists.